So we're talking about stewardship, right? And I think for me, it came as a reflective point as I reflect and as I navigate the workspace, church space. And I think whenever we say stewardship, people think that we're talking about a subservient attitude that you have to carry around everywhere that you go. But I think I asked myself a lot of rhetorical questions that helped me reflect. The first thing was, what is it that I have right now that can never be taken away from me? For me, I came to an answer that said nothing, right? And because if I leave this earth, there's really nothing that I take with me. And that brought the concept of why I believe stewardship is something that you have to hold and pertain, even if you own things. But you still can own things and still be a steward. So I think my starting point was more on my personal reflection. And I was like, let us have a conversation. Let me get Senzo on the line. Let's talk about this. So I don't know, what has it been like for you?
Yeah. What you were thinking is it's biblical. 1 Peter 6:7 says we come in with nothing and we leave with nothing. Literally. I've also been in a general stewardship recently. In fact, I was in a connect group yesterday. Connect group, some people called it a home self, same thing, essentially. And yeah, there was only 3 of us with the guys. And the conversation initially started around burnout. So, church dynamics and people talking about burnout, and there were different sentiments amongst the group that were in. But yeah, this discussion was crazy, right? So they talk about burnout at the start, and I think everybody that was talking there was really open. And when they started talking about burnout, some of the perspectives were, I think some of the people that are complaining about burnout in our dynamic, right, in our context, we're just making excuses for not wanting to serve. And I just mentioned the fact that, how come I haven't been burned out? I do a lot and such and such. And then we started having a conversation, right? And we ended up realizing that basically we started talking about burnout. And we talked about, yes, they are actually individual factors to that. There's organizational factors, societal factors that contribute to that. The conversation went on until we got into actually a conversation around stewardship. But the conversation specifically was around the theology of the body, the stewardship of the body. I started a conversation because I recently had some health issues.
Okay.
And these health issues I had were because of the bad lifestyle, specifically bad eating, working all of the time, and it caught up to me. After 2 years of this pain in my abdomen, I decided it's time for me to go to a doctor. And I was honestly scared.
Yeah.
I was scared because I was praying, God, do a miracle. Come on.
Yeah.
I know I'm the one that's been irresponsible, but just bail me out. Right. But I eventually went there to the doctor, found out it was not something as serious because I thought it was going to be surgery or something like that. And I'm in the health profession myself. I'm the person that should be advising people about such things, but I wasn't. And sort of that, it got me thinking about stewardship of the body. And one of the main thing that we started talking about, the question I posed is, do we as Christians or as the church have a theology of the body, a theology of the body outside of the fact that you just have to be pure, outside of the moral aspects which are commonly emphasized. The whole point, why is that important? It's because it's about stewardship, which the way I see it, and the greatest definition for stewardship, the one that even sparked all these thinking, was paper. There's a God written by Newell and Newell in 2012. He defined stewardship. This is the most beautiful definition I've ever had. He said, stewardship is the responsibility of if the believer for the effective management of God's very good creation and ultimately his glory. That killed me, especially from the way I view God. Like when I read Genesis, there's 2 things. I think I've mentioned these countless times. God created us for relationship and rulership, right? We know that ultimately we are his regents, so we are managing, which is the whole concept of stewardship, right?
Yeah.
We are managers, he is the owner. But this part that he says, the effective management, right? Manager of God's good, very good creation, or God's good creation, and ultimately God's glory. When you listen to them, what does that get you thinking about? The effective management of God's good creation and ultimately his glory.
Hmm.
What is that? What does that spark? And let me throw the question back to you. Would you say you agree with that type of definition? And if you do, is there anything that resonates with you?
Yeah, for me, I think it's that effective part. Because when I was thinking about the concept of
Yeah,
stewardship, I asked myself, what is effective management? You can't be an effective manager if your sight and lens about the things that you are managing is not correct. The fact
yeah,
that now you're saying that it is God's creation. Let's go
yeah,
back to the starting point that I started the conversation with to say, what is it that I currently have that can never be taken away from me? And I said it's nothing, because it
yeah,
boils down to the fact that I don't really own anything. Everything that I currently own as leased under my name is something that really ultimately belongs to God. So because
yeah,
this belongs to God, then there's a certain attitude that I have in my management. So I want to
yeah,
make it more practical. Let's say that I am a manager of a person at work. Remember that Psalm 24, I even loved verse 1 when it speaks about the earth is the Lord, the fullness thereof, and all that dwell within. It's not just the creation, but the humans within. So now I have to have a cognitive understanding that as I manage this person, this is God's creation.
yeah,
This is a person
yeah,
who shares God's image.
yeah,
But then we don't have effective management principles because we in a society that says when I have a management post, when I'm a CEO, I'm a boss. And then what tends to happen, I usurp ultimate authority and not
yeah,
designated authority. So I
yeah,
do believe that effective management then comes in from that perspective of understanding first the things that have been delegated under your management, that they are not yours, but leased under your name.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's especially the designated authority and the ultimate
Yeah,
authority,
yeah, yeah.
because I think it's something that has been creeping in into us also. We, even though sometimes we communicate one thing, but the way we live our life, it's as if we own ourselves.
Exactly.
And it's like normally, like one of the things I love, Genesis 1 says, in the beginning, God created, which if we look at things, for me, the root, I always like to look at things theologically
Yeah, yeah. And through frameworks, I'm waiting for the framework.
and through frameworks, right? And for me, that it says in everything again, God is the creator. But if God is the creator, they say if we think of it like in a normal day life, you speak about a person being an inventor, right? And they have a patent, and we say they have patent rights, or when someone writes something, have um, those intellectual property rights and things like that, right? So that statement, the first statement, is actually a legal statement, which informs us the very sobering thing. Sometimes it sounds harsh, but it's true. The fact that when you're talking about human rights, if you're looking at that text from a legal perspective, they only apply to humans. But ultimately, when you look at things, it's only God that has rights.
Sure.
And because he created us, God owns us. Even though we might not be objects, but he made us to be subject, but he owns us. And in that statement, it says God's good creation. I think we all agree it's good. And he makes that statement, it is good, it is good, in the song of creation, Genesis 1. We find that there, even in a sinless, perfect world, right? He creates. As I was thinking about that, one of the questions that came in, what has God created? Right? I know that God is created, so he has rights to everything, including me. And sometimes we'll often think about that, right? And we often externalize that the stewardship of God's, the effective management of God's creation. It includes the things within us and
Mm.
also the things around us, which includes our bodies,
Yeah.
which includes our time, which includes Genesis 2 verse 15, take care of the earth, like getting to equal theology, association.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, God's good creation includes the things within us and the things around us. It's everything, which includes our body. And somehow I feel like, and I'm not saying people do this intentionally, often when we think about the concept of stewardship, we reduce it to finances.
Yeah, that's very
And
true.
often when we think about the concept of stewardship, where we start is also an issue.
Yeah,
When we think about stewardship, we start firstly about giving or our activity instead of starting where it actually starts, which is receiving or God's activity. Our activity is a response to God's activity.
sure.
We are only able to steward because something has been given to us. And we know that that something is actually everything that we have. And for me, it's obviously still a journey. And like one of the things I'm eating better, and I'm benefiting from that. I'm starting to try to eat better, to take care of my better. Initially, I did it for, I want to lie, for health purposes.
Yeah.
I've started going to gym. It was also for health and aesthetic purposes. I didn't want this belly that I had. As much as I'm a Christian, we said like, no, I'm doing this to take care of God's, but it didn't start there.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
honestly didn't. But now, like after, like in this journey that I'm having, it's honestly changed everything.
Mm.
In that aspect of my life, and hopefully you'll empower me to look at every aspect of my life beyond the body. Though I do, and like that whole line, that concept I keep on repeating about kingdoms of theology.
Yeah, yeah.
That it's Christocentric, but it's also holistic, and just understanding stewardship. And I think sometimes, we haven't really understood the fullness of it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you've said something that I wanted to muse on a bit. You said it at the beginning and you've revisited it, this thing of the theology of the body. And I think it's also timely because the current health predicament that came upon my life, not because of something I did, not because of my eating, but it made me also think about this whole theology of the body. Because for me, it wasn't a concept. I've never called the theology of the body, but it made me think. I think when I was lying down in hospital, okay, Christians who were my brothers and sisters in the Lord who knew the matter and joined in prayer, they
Yeah,
actually didn't want me to go into surgery. They wanted that miraculous hand of God to just
yeah,
save me so that I don't go into surgery. But it made me do something that I personally failed to do, which it put me
okay,
in a point of rest. To a point where even Usmith was teasing me to say, knowing you that you're a busybody, I'm sure you're more stressed that you can't do anything than actually being stressed about you're sick.
yeah, yeah,
And for me, that I felt that even mindset on its own is a bit messed up.
yeah.
That
It is.
you work yourself to a point where the only time that you rest is when you're sick. And I had to revisit that. It was the first time ever I've been booked off sick for that long and booked off sick to be hospitalized. First time ever to even have a surgeon. So for
Yeah,
me, it was a shocker moment to say, I need to revisit something in me because I also see that I've looked at stewardship as more of activities that I need to do and neglect this part of the body. And I need it in order to fulfill these activities. So I also wanted you to kind of revisit that because you said the concept, but you didn't say what was the conversation regarding the theology of the body when people were complaining about burnout.
yeah. It was quite a long conversation. Something that was supposed to be 40 minutes, but to summarize it, I think one of the things we started to talk about, obviously, sometimes the reason why we get burnt out, sometimes it can be individual factors. Example, we're not resting.
Mm, yeah.
We're not resting. Example, a big issue, which I admitted because I also had an issue with rest. I remember I did it successfully. But for the first time, spent 2 days without reading in 15 years. Yes. Hey, but it was very uncomfortable at first. But I tried to teach myself, like example, today I have read something, but I just try to slow down on Fridays. So we talked about the fact there are individual level factors that contribute to it. In terms of just wisdom, the wisdom to rest. Also, time management.
Yeah.
Time management piece. Because inside of time management, you have attention management, you have energy management, you have priority management. And I was mentioning how all those things, just priority management, around attention management, you end up doing something longer because you don't know how to manage your attention. You have your laptop on, you have something playing, that will affect just scientifically looking at things like that. Also, just our general wisdom around health, right?
Yeah.
And it got into a bit of a prickly point that was being controversial, not even trying to be controversial, but an issue. Like speaking from the person of health, that I noticed that a lot of people have an unhealthy relationship with caffeine
That's true.
in coffee and also energy drinks. If you start that topic in the church, you'll be surprised by how many people have serious issues there, addictions, and others they're unaware about the dangers of the level of consumptions that we have. So we talked about that, admitted that, but we also admitted that sometimes there are organizational factors, right? Which include like, let's say in the church space you're in, sometimes when you are small, like everybody serving every week, when you're bigger, there can be rotation. So sometimes the systems that we have within the church, in terms of the workflows, like for serving, and sometimes communication also, because we might say we are available, but are we effective? So anytime we're looking at things, we have to look at it from individual and from the leadership perspective. Are we creating environment? Because the church is both an organization and a mechanism at the same time,
Yeah.
right? So there can be organizational cultures that contribute to burnout. And is that good if we understand the theology of the body? Is that because like with rest, it's not just something that we like one person, remember one minister preaching, talking, not even talking about the concept between the relief and rest.
Yeah.
These are two different things. And I like to poke like, I think I still hold this belief that we are supposed to be working from rest in order to, instead of resting, working to rest. And for many of us, we don't even know how to rest. We just know relief. And when you do relief, those things are not effective because even though you might get time to rest your body, your soul is not rested. And how could we can engage that? So we talked about the individual dynamics, the organizational, and also the societal dynamics. Because one person was mentioning, our parents used to work all the time. Like, times are different. The economy is different. Industry is
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Yeah.
How the work hours what we work, they're different. We might have a retirement age, but we're working a lot. Some of us have 2 jobs and 3 jobs and things
Yeah.
like that. So all of that, it speaks to us. And yeah, we didn't have necessarily answers, but with how can we, maybe you might stir something for you to think about or to share in the future in terms of how do we make sure that, because I don't think us burning out honors God, even when we think we are burning out because we are serving God, which was a point that came out that sometimes wisdom is telling a person no, even when they don't want to. Like sometimes you have to confront people like, where you going? Especially when you're wiser and you've seen things. And you have to say no also. And when I'm benefiting from you though, most of the time, if I'm your leader or not even a leader, maybe and I'm benefiting from you and you doing this and that, do we actually decide to serve the person by saying, by just giving them the relief at risk? I think often we don't because we're benefiting from it.
Yeah.
Honestly, we don't. And leaders are exhausted. And many leaders are exhausted.
Yeah.
Who actually speaks to them and tells them, slow down? Because we know exhaustion means leads to many things. It affects your faith, it affects your health, it affects many aspects of our lives. So I think there's good science, there's many things that we can actually use again in order to steward our energy, to steward our bodies properly, to honor our bodies that Christ died for. Christ values us. He values our bodies. We should also value them. So that's a summary.
Yeah. And I think it's pivotal because and important because what I pick from it is you're already touching on one of the effective management ways in which we can really steward. And I think, as you said, when we talk about the body, it's more about holiness, how we dress, and so forth, but not really the health related factors. It's like, it's very rare for me, probably it's just a lack of exposure, to really hear persistent conversations around gluttony. Do you understand? Because that
Yeah,
also speaks to the theology of the body. There are certain things that we want God to save us from, but it's really a lack of discipline on our end. I can't
yeah,
just eat anyhow and then when I have a health issue, God must just drop a miracle. But there has to be a sense that says, Zama, just change how you eat, exercise regularly, and just honor your body, you know? just take care of your body because that's how you're honoring God through it. So I think we don't want to talk about those things because they don't seem spiritual enough. But for me, I saw that when your body is not functioning, there are a lot of spiritual activities you cannot encounter. I remember when, like, even out of surgery the first week, I was so drugged up. There's no way that I could be spending hours reading the Bible, praying. In most cases, I was more focused on the pain I was feeling and how to relieve myself. The only way to relieve myself is the pain drips that they were giving me that knocks me out. So that's not a way and a state that God wants us to function from. So it doesn't serve anyone when we are in that state of we are unhealthy, we have to be put off, and because you can't even engage on the very things that you love. And I think that is even harder for us to say no to spiritual and church activities, then we can say no to like organizational activities outside the church, something that's work related, something that's school related, because that sense of guilt where we have created an environment that says the more we serve, the more you're a better member, reliable member, we can rely on you. And the more you are spiritual in the eyes of God, but it's not necessarily the case. And we don't really talk about energy scheduling. That's a term I actually stole from you. When I listened to one of the episodes you had on your podcast, I was like, this is very interesting. We schedule everything else, but not our energy. Where does my energy need to go towards this week so that I hit the milestones that are necessary and not spread myself too thin just because I want to please everyone? But those are not the type of conversations we have. The type of conversations we have is, how can I serve more? How can I be visible more? That's what you hear most cases. We want to see you be all over, but at the end of the day, when that very same person who spread themselves thin is unavailable, it becomes a disaster even for the organization, because you have this one person wearing 4 hats. And imagine when you have to replace, that's not an effective system. So I love that aspect, and I think it's something I'm going to research more, something that I'm going to read up more, the theology of the body. How do we really steward our body, and how do we keep up with healthy activities that help us to be in a space that we can better serve God, so that when we have those activities from God, we're better stewards from them. So I also want us to kind of talk about, stewardship then in that lens of the time that we're in. The time that we're in, Senzo says that let's level up and boss up in their language. And that's sort of the language. It seems as if it's quite contradictory to stewardship, because as I said, when people hear stewardship, it's like, oh, I'm just a servant and a slave of this master, but it's not that. So I want us to talk about stewardship now in the context of what is being preached out there and what is being said out there. For me personally, as to start off, is when I looked at ownership, ownership seems as it's the ultimate goal that we are meant to reach. You are respected for the things that you own rather than the things that you manage. But now I want to go to this point to say, I, as Mthombeni, say that everything that I have under my name, I see it as being leased under my name so that I am a responsible manager. If I own a house, it may be under me, but in reality, in my spiritual reality, it is leased under my name so that I honor and steward it. So now how do we then become better stewards in this culture of us becoming bosses, of us leveling up and owning things? How do we then carry that attitude of effective stewardship?
That's a a relevant question, because one of the things we didn't mention was society. And I think one of the things we have to realize is that even our biblical view, like the way we see the world or our ideological structures, they are shaped within culture and by the culture that we're in. Or you can put it in other words, that sometimes our views about God in different contexts around theology, often, in fact, they are not necessarily shaped by the word of the Bible, but they are shaped by the world in front of the Bible, which is the one we are in, whether we are aware of that or not. And one of the things that are in the world in front of the Bible which is our times, the world we are in, we have a hustle culture, and the hustle culture is affecting us, right?
Yeah.
And it has infected us, even in the church. And yeah, there's many ways. So like one of the ways, like when you think stewardship, I think I mentioned that whole idea around God's activity and our activity. And sometimes what happens is that we subconsciously we lower God's capability to human responsibility, where God's capability basically is measured by our own ability. In other words, for God to do something, we must do it. And He can only do things based on our ability. And that sort of mindset also can make us adopt to the sort of hustle culture and things like that, meaning,
Yeah.
no, this has to happen and things like that. But also another point, which I won't get into, it's just something for people to think about. We can look at society in this lens also, in terms of production and consumption. What are our, as Christians, our ethics around production, or our theology around production, and what is our theology around consumption? Because I think those two things, like when you sit down and think about it, obviously it's something we can go on for hours talking about it. But our theology around production is corrupt and it's impacting us. And sometimes for some people it's making them martyrs, when at that point they have to be Marys. Martha was working, Mary was sitting down and saying, why is she sitting down? And Jesus said, she's actually doing what she's supposed to be doing right now,
Yeah.
which is in line with scripture. God creates 6 days. On the seventh day, he rests. And for him, he's not really resting because he's tired. And he gives us that gift, that principle of rest.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know in the Old Testament it's Sabbath and whatever. And perhaps the question we should ask ourselves, why did God make this a commandment, not a suggestion, that we should abide by the principle of rest? Shows that rest is something that is very important in his heart. And it's something that should influence our theology of production. But also on the other end, especially because of the world we exist in, market economy, this capitalist society we're in, we also have a corrupt theology of consumption. And some of the reason why we like bossing so much and doing so much, it's because of our appetite.
Sure.
And scriptures teaches us to also have a healthy appetite. An example you just mentioned, a sin that is mentioned in the book of Galatians, which is gluttony, which honestly, this is something I was struggling with a bit. I noticed that a lot of time when I'm eating, I'm not eating because I'm hungry. I was eating for many, sometimes just boredom, sometimes it's just gluttony, honestly. And speaking to Smith, remember, I think it was a week or two ago, I bought 2 shawarmas.
Okay.
And conviction hit me. And I called Smith because it was around about lunch. I'm like, dude, I have 1 shawarma. Come take it, right? I'm breaking this sin of gluttony. So I want you to share in my sin. And Smith said, this is a sin I'm very glad to partake with you.
Yeah.
So God teaches us in His Word to practice restraint, to have a healthy relationship with consumption. So it might, I think it is speaking. I don't know if I'm responding to that or not, but I think our theology around consumption and our theology around production, the inflow and the outflow, the breathing in and the breathing out, we have to consider that and really contemplate and get into the text and see what has God said about production and what has God said around our consumption. There's a lot I could say about that, but let me stop there and hear you.
But why did you stop there? A glimpse. A glimpse.
No, it's a lot. We
You
can
know
go
what I
into to many things around that, from our order in the universe, how when God says in Genesis 1, this be fruitful, multiply, and subdue the earth. Uh, day 6 is God's very good creation. Yes, He made us as His regents. And we see that verse hierarchically only, in terms of hierarchy. It's God, then He puts man. But we don't understand that with all of creation, it's not just a hierarchical relationship, but it's also a symbiotic relationship. There's a level of interdependence, which again will get us into now a theology of sustainability, which feeds into both the production and the consumption. And in everything that we do, like we in the academic space, right? But when you view things like that about sustainability, when say God tend and cared, again, that's why I said, let me stop there because it starts another.
Yeah, I understand that. But what I also wanted to piggyback on so that also our viewers understand was when we say consumption, person will think food. And
Oh,
and
yeah.
I just wanted you to clarify that point that you were talking about, that we need to clarify the theology of consumption just in a line.
Yeah. That just speaks to all of God's creation. How do we use it? Whether it be food, on everything, like everything. And it's beyond materialism. I think people just think materialistic, it's just wanting, wanting, wanting. But how are we doing in terms of how are you using God's creation in terms of for us, what is production? Speaking about how we're using God's creation, let's say for the other. So there must be that balance beyond food, beyond things. You just wanting more and more. And sometimes we are climbing. Why? What exactly are we climbing? What exactly do we want? Want more. It's more and more and more. And we're eating a lot of food. When is it enough financially?
Yeah,
When is it enough?
yeah, yeah.
When is it enough food wise? When is it enough? Like in a lot of things that, and I think that's the issue. What is a healthy level of enough? What is a healthy level of doing? What is a healthy level of having? I think that simple way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and I get that. And now it makes it clear how we join all these concepts together. We spoke about the hustle economy that pushes a person to have. So, because a salary on its own is not enough to get me
exactly.
the life that I want, I'm going to add three jobs that this one body has to do. So, I'm
Yeah.
trying to hold the principle of leveling up and bossing up, whilst I'm infringing on the principle and the theology of the body, taking care of that. And I think what is important is how do we then better steward everything that God has entrusted in us without putting ourselves at the sacrifice and at the altar of destroying ourselves. Because I
Yeah.
know that our bodies are able to tell us that we've eaten enough. Your body gives you indication that, okay, I'm full now. But when it comes to money, when it comes to resources, when it comes to all these other things that we want, sometimes we don't have something that tells us that it is enough. And I think that is a thing that will help us to be able to be better stewards, even when we're living in an economy that says, boss up more and level up. And also, there's this obsessive culture of control that comes with
Yeah.
this element. Because when people hear steward, it's like you're subservient or you're just a person managing. You're not really a boss. We want to hear from people who are CEOs and people who are bosses, because there's this level of control, which I personally um, I'm reflecting and also thinking about the type of leader that I have to be, the type of leader that I need to be over the people that have been entrusted under me. And that is why I think this whole concept of stewardship for me landed quite deeply from last week leading to this. And for
Yeah.
more is why I thought about stewardship specifically over people is we are given an authority that is the size of a manager, but we
Yeah.
extend that authority to be at a size of a creator. What do I
Yeah.
mean by that is if I give a person an opportunity, a work opportunity, and they grow, and inside of me there is something that says, I may do. I say those words to that person. I have now exaggerated my authority, delegated authority. That authority was just to give this person a platform. And
Yeah.
now I have entered into a shoe of a creator, because when I say I made, you are saying that you made a person, as much as it's not a literal saying, but we are trying to take glory over an opportunity that even God has given unto us, because it is an opportunity for you to have people
Yeah.
that are serving under you. Whether you're a leader at work, whether you're a pastor at church, those are still God's people that you answer to. And I always like to use that analogy of Cain and Abel, because when Cain decided to kill his brother, God was not just vindicating the issue of murder, but he was vindicating also on the issue of Cain seeing himself so supreme that he decided to say, this is now an opportune time to end my life of my brother because I have decided his life expectancy. And I think a lot of us, in very subtle ways, love that sense of control. That's why we want
Of
to
course.
level up and boss up, because we
Yeah.
love having control over people, but we are not meant to control people. We are meant to steward over people, right? And that speaks also to some of the management styles that we see, leadership
Of
styles,
course.
shapes how we are leaders and managers, because the type of leader, the type of manager that you are is shaped by your ideology and what you believe your role is. And for the longest of time, I've never really thought about it. That is why we have people who are micromanagers, people who want to know where you are, because you're trying to do something that you're not meant to do, which is to control.
Yeah.
And and once we actually sit down and think about it, why do I really want to be a boss of that company? Is it because it comes with a certain element or a certain status? Or is it because there is something I have to contribute in the economy? These are two different questions that lead to the same power. Sometimes do you understand? So sometimes it's like we want to have this because of the status, not because I have anything there's a problem that I want to solve, or there's a societal good that the business and company, but rather it's going to elevate me. It's going to put me on higher heights to a point that people must see that I am a boss. And for a lot of us, even as believers, struggle with that mentality. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that people should not be having businesses. In having that business, what is the ethos and what is the attitude that shapes the values of that business? Because it can't be the same as a person who's worldly. But you find that even in our stride and even in our desires to have all these resources and to have all the money that we want, we just want to be known as bosses rather than for us to make an impact in society. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, I agree completely. For let's say for someone listening, I think it goes back to something we have talked about before, about does the Bible, I think when you're looking at the book of Genesis, like we quickly established that we have one God who sits on all the thrones, the throne of grace, the throne of justice, all of the thrones, right? Which is very, looking at the background of Genesis, it was very obviously countercultural to have that message. He is both the God of the city, the God of the household, the God of the nation, the God of the universe, like the same God. And going back to where I started with humans, we are in the same plane. We don't have the same knowledge, the same gift, but we are in the same plane. So that whole idea is that does the Bible, it's an open question. Does the Bible teach hierarchical authority or relational authority? And one of the statements they put is that I've heard they say leadership is not the right of the leader, it's the privilege given by the followers. And I think the way that we orientate ourselves, I think we think leadership is our right and not the privilege given by. And once your mindset is shifted there, and we understand, obviously, I think the roots of that are both by birth, sinful nature we're born with that. We want to control because of sin. We want to be God because of sin. And it goes to childhood, grow up without any sense of power. For whatever reasons, it can be political, it can be economic, it can be social reasons. So your birth, your childhood, then our society also tries to enforce that ideology around dominance and control. And our weak faith also, because many could argue that when you're looking at the Old Testament with Israel, it was essentially a trust issue. And they didn't trust God enough, so they wanted to assume control of their lives. That is embedded, and hence we have to be intentional and aware and submit ourselves to God's word, to scripture, for him to form us in order to be like Christ, who being God, taught himself as nothing to lower himself. Philippians 2, the kenosis, where he emptied himself. And there has to be that emptying also, and allowing God to renew our minds and things like that. But another point that I'm going to throw back to you is the reality that it's gotten even worse, right? I don't know if whether it is worse or not. But another dynamic is one of the things that I've also observed in society is that now we know man is created in God's image. But what is happening covertly is, and sometimes It's very clear. A lot of people think this is obvious. We have now valued things above people. If you take R1 million and then the person finds it easier to kill another because the value that they have for things has surpassed the value that they have people that are made in the image of God. And I think a lot of our behaviors also show that. And something even worse, that sometimes we have even valued things even beyond people. We value things beyond God himself, which now that is essentially idolatry. And again, all that comes again with the issue of control and also the issue of whose the world is this? Do we really believe that God is sovereign? Do we believe that God is creator? Do you believe that God is omnipotent, that is all seeing, that is actually acting in the universe? Do you believe honestly that history is his story, right? And that the future belongs to him? Do we believe the text from Genesis to Revelation that in the end he wins? And I think some of our actions, our practices, our thinking actually betray. And I'm speaking to myself. I'm not judging someone that is there on the outside. I've noticed it myself. Like sometimes I would work. I'm like, why? Do I actually trust that I can not do as much? We have to work, right? I think sometimes the issue is that we think grace is opposed to effort, whereas it's opposed to learning in order, right? But sometimes the way I'm working, it has betrayed me sometimes that I'm not trusting God. I'm not talking about, for me personally, I'm not really trying to survive. Honestly, God has supplied my needs. I don't have to wake up and think so. But like, yeah, for me, I'm preaching to myself right now. Sometimes the reason why I'm struggling to actively be a good steward, it's because I fail to trust God at times. There are seasons when I'm there, but there are other seasons when and it has hit me. But yeah, I trust God. Let's just say I trust God. But but yeah, I'm asking God continue to help me to actually believe my beliefs. Yeah, those are my 2 cents.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm picking a lot from what you said and trying to sift the part that you were throwing at me. But I'll just reflect. Probably these are our parting reflections. And I think there's something that you touched on do we really believe that God is sovereign, and do we really see him as a creator? But most importantly, there's this issue of how we are willing to sacrifice people, sacrifice relationships, and sacrifice community over resources. And I think it's because one of the things that I see is that we have a lot of idolatry that we don't recognize in ourselves, because we think that idolatry is only when Israel bowed down to a golden calf. But idolatry is also bowing down to your own selfish ambitions. And that's the one thing, the worship of self, the self-centeredness that is so extreme that you are willing to sacrifice relationships because there is something in you that is not fulfilled. So it starts from self, that I am more important than this relationship. And once you have an elevated view of yourself, you don't see the value of other people, and you don't see the value of community. The only thing that's important is who you are and what you have. And it boils down to that idea that I was talking about, that sometimes we fall into a trap that we don't realize that we are worshiping ourselves. We are worshiping our selfish ambitions, and we've put God's activities on the side, and we have recycled our own activities that are amiss from his will. And it's a dark path, because that is something that I think we're talking about when we're still pursuing our PhDs, to say that this type of sacrifice that we had to take, you come out of communities, there's certain things that you're not doing socially. You realize that when you're done with that PhD, you've sacrificed every communal aspect around your life, and you realize it was not worth it, because when it's time to celebrate, you're by yourself. Because life
Yeah.
is continuing. People are not going to wait for you. People are not going to build their lives around you. That's because you have put this important thing and pursued it only at the expense of everything else. So I say this to say we have to see value beyond resources. We think value is resources and value is money, but we have to see values beyond that and see a person in your life as a value and as a resource. Because at the end of the day, you can accumulate everything and still have a very miserable, lonely life because there's no community. There is no life around you. So I think with topic on its own, as I've conversed with you, is I realize that stewardship is such a broad concept, so big, bigger than what my thought was when I came and started this conversation. And I think it's something that needs to be broken down, because you spoke about the theology of the body, the consumption culture, theology that we have around what we consume versus what we produce. And I think this is more of our ideas around the concept of stewardship and seeing how broad it is. It's not just spiritual concept, but it's quite practical in a life of a believer and in a life of a person generally. And I think there's a lot of things that I have picked up that I want to walk out and reflect and come back and speak about regarding this particular topic of stewardship. So I don't know, what are your parting reflections on what we just spoke about?
My parting words are, people can read in their home. I like the way the Message translation puts things. Romans 10, where it speaks about the fact that the do-it-yourself life is a grave tending life. It's that, and here I have Matthew 11, verse 28 to 30, again from the Message translation.
Yeah.
And these are essentially my parting words. It reads, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real risk. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you live freely and lightly." Those are just my parting terms. God knows the rhythm. Just hold tightly to him. Be open-minded. Yeah, he'll show you how to walk according to the rhythms of grace. And those rhythms, you dance differently. And the tune you dance with is different with the tune of the world. And it's a refreshing tune. And I just hope ultimately, we don't have answers. We are just talking essentially, but God knows. God is not confused. God is not burnt out. God is not anxious. God is not sick.
Yeah.
God is not broke. God is not depressed. And he can teach us how to be like him. That's where I love it.
Thank you so much, Senzo, and for taking your time joining us for this very important conversation. And just for those who are tuning in, who are listening, or watching this, I think there's a lot to reflect on, and we would like to hear your aspects of your understanding of stewardship, or areas where you feel quite challenged to change, and areas that you want to explore more regarding the topic of stewardship, and areas that you find quite intriguing. There are certain things that during this conversation I find quite intriguing, and things that we normally ignore in the community of believers, and things that we have to revisit because they have a detrimental effect of how we do ministry and how we really become active agents of God's activity on earth. And my parting words is more on, let's reflect and also let's co-create on this topic, and to speak more about really what is stewardship and what is God calling us towards regarding this topic of stewardship, because I don't believe it's just a random conversation, but I do believe that it carries conviction, it carries correction, carries information, it carries, a lot of things that God wants us to change as we are conversing. So that is it from us. And thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much.